This conference will now be recorded.
All right, folks, so today we're in Chapter 13, the nervous system, and I'd like to start off with discussing with you all information regarding Botox in particular. Okay? So Botox, how many of you have heard in classroom here have heard of Botox, right? We all have, right? We all know it, depending upon, how good the person who's doing it, the person could look like not a big deal and like nothing's gone on, or depending upon how the patient's body reacts, and also upon the skill of whoever's doing it, they can look kind of like, have you seen this, right? Have you seen it? It kind of looks a little weird. There's other issues that can go on too, where actually, depending upon the skill and what goes on with the patient, you can actually have, when they try to do a brow lift and have the musculature be paralyzed in such a way that they're not having the musculature close the eyebrow and such, that the actual eyebrows can, what's called ptosis, or drooping or dropping. So that can also be an issue. But the reason why I have my little friend here on the camera, so let's go here, and it looks like a scary horror movie kind of thing, is I want to show you all, as far as, I watch too many scary movies, I know I do, sorry. Actually, we're going to a fun haunt, Reaper's Revenge, in it's like 2 weeks or something like that. And it's just funny because getting scared and you start to laugh and you start to it just, I don't know, it's good stuff. And it releases, hey, we're in the nervous system, it releases good chemicals, neurochemicals that make you happy. So, so even though it's scary and it's a little crazy, it's fun stuff. So anyway, we're looking at our scary muscular head, and actually you can see part of the musculature of the face. And so this is what I'm trying to show you all here in classroom, as well as those online, that, let's see, go that way, there you go, that the muscles of the face can be injected with this Botox, and as such, it's a botulinum toxin. Now, if you were to, so let's put it here, if you were to be exposed to this botulinum toxin, say by eating a can of some type of food that actually has dents in it and that has been and if it actually has this bacterium present, yes, this bacterium present within the can, and you eat it, you could die actually from it. Okay, so botulism is a very, very bad thing, right? So they work with the toxin in order to make it so that it's able to do its job, yet not so that it's going to affect other muscles, right? Because they're actually they're injecting it into specific areas. If you were to take it into your body, could it affect the muscles of respiration and affect the ability to be able to breathe? Most definitely. Okay, so what we're looking at as far as when they're doing the injections, so really what we're looking at here is that we have the frontalis muscle. So this muscle right here. So can you all lift your eyebrows up a bit and such, right? And you feel like that muscle is like doing some work there? That's a part of what's going on. Now there are other deeper muscles also part of that, but primarily it's that frontalis muscle. There's also muscles, let's see here if we can bring them a little bit closer. That's a little spooky, but like on this side. The muscles that actually surround the eye, they're called the Orbicularis Oculi. So these muscles that actually surround the eye, right? There are muscles also, like I said, the frontalis muscles, and there are muscles that are here in the center of the forehead called the glabella, this glabella area right here, that also they can put these injections in and help to cause paralysis of these muscles so that they're really not working like they properly should. So we all can make, smile, that, go out here. These are like the muscles of facial expression are the muscles that are controlling the facial expression. These are the muscles all on the face like that, right? And so you'll see that there are muscles right here that connect to the actual angle of the mouth, and right there, so they can actually help to bring the mouth down, bring the mouth up, bring the mouth out a little bit, allowing for a smile, allowing for chewing. It's pretty remarkable, actually, what these muscles can do. And so the Botox, on a very localized level, can cause change to the musculature, right, in a negative way, but positive for the patient who wants to not have wrinkles showing. Also, for folks that actually sweat a lot, hyperhidrosis, okay? I'll make a copy of this. I think it's kind of interesting. You can do whatever you want. It's not going to be tested on, but I think it's kind of interesting. Hyperhidrosis has to do with excessive sweating. And some people will actually get this Botox injections in the forehead, scalp and such, in order to paralyze those actual sweat glands, prevent their ability to be able to release sweat for a short-term period of time. And what goes on, folks, I'm going to show you here on the board. So let's see if I'm right. No, this one. Okay. So here's this, what's called this neuromuscular junction, this nerve muscle area. And what happens is that there are chemicals here. There are little packages of chemicals that are released and can interact with receptors on the muscle. Do you remember I showed you this, the neuromuscular junction? I showed you an image of it, I believe, in the muscular system. But these chemicals can be released in this space. And then they allow for then muscle to contract, the beginning of muscle contraction. Well, with Botox, Botox will prevent that chemical, acetylcholine, from being released. And if it does that, will there be contraction of the muscles? No, there will not. So quite interesting how Botox actually, it works by preventing these nerve chemicals, like I said to you, serotonin, dopamine, right? These are also nerve chemicals, these neurotransmitters. It'll prevent them from going across this little space here. Remember I did say this to you. I said to you that if this represents the nerve, my hand, right? And the extension of it, and the desktop represents a muscle, well, there's going to be chemicals released between that space. They don't actually touch between that space in order for then the muscle to begin the whole contraction process. Okay? So Botox prevents those chemicals from touching the muscle. Go ahead.
So the chemical that's released by the nerves, or that's prevented to be released by Botox,
Acetylcholine, it's called.
Acetylcholine. Is there a chemical compound or organic chemical compound that could, I guess, do the opposite, is what I'm trying to say?
Well, there are chemicals that are called mimic. They're mimics. You know what a mimic is? Have you ever heard of that term, mimic? It's kind of a weird word, right? But so say I do this. I'm talking and I do this. And then say you stand up and you say, you know, kind of like you're mimicking me. You're like you're mimicking what I'm doing. You're copying what I'm doing. Well, there are chemicals that mimic the body's chemicals. Yeah, they're called mimetics. It's kind of a weird word, but it's called a mimetic, all right? And so this chemical that we can introduce like a pharmaceutical, like a drug, we can introduce into the body that can actually mimic the chemicals that your body produces and allow for something to happen or block receptors that the chemical, so we have these specific receptors throughout the body for specific chemicals. So it's only, this one will only allow for this, that, but we also have ones that are for a different type of a chemical, right? So that this chemical could not go here, or this chemical couldn't go there. There's specific receptors, understood? So there's specific, it's like a key in a lock. there's only a certain, well, this one is like a code, but if it had like a key, it only takes a certain key. But can I create another key that's not the original key and still fit in the lock and have it open? Sure I can, right? So kind of similar to that. So yes, there are chemicals that can actually, that can do the same thing, or that can block the action of the specific chemicals in our body. Absolutely. So just getting back to it all, it's kind of interesting, and I wanted to just introduce that to you all, that Botox is one way that we can actually see, or some other type of toxins. How about another type of toxin? Say a snake bite. You get snake bit by a snake, and it releases its neurotoxin. So these are toxins that affect the nervous system. And that also can then affect how musculature actually functions. And it affects your muscles that allow you to breathe, allow you to respirate and such. That's a very bad problem. It could lead to death. All right, so folks, let's look at our nervous system PowerPoint today. So you'll recall when we went into, when we were in the first chapter, and we were talking about the different body systems. And we said that the nervous system does what? You tell me. What's that? Communication, right? So there's communication that takes place in the nervous system. There's another C word that I would use. Control. Communicates, right? Definitely communicates. And it controls what's going on within the body. Actually, the nervous system works in conjunction with what's called the endocrine system. The endocrine system. The endocrine system deals with the actual production of chemicals, hormones, right? Things like thyroid hormone, think testosterone, think estrogen, right? Those are just a few. Those are hormones produced in the endocrine system, and also other body systems throughout, like the reproductive system for the other chemicals that are like testosterone and estrogen, that will also be involved in controlling what takes place within the body. Okay? So then we could say that in the nervous system, it helps to maintain homeostasis, a stable environment within the body, no matter what goes on outside of the body. We could be in cold, hot, wet, dry, whatever temperature, right? Hot, cold, whatever, right? And our bodies will still maintain a relative regular temperature. Now, we might get a little warm if it's hot, or we might get a little cold if it's really cold out, and then our body will do things to regulate that and help to bring up the temperature or lower the temperature. But that again, homeostasis. So the nervous system as well as the endocrine system are involved in that. Now you'll see here where it says here sensory neurons, interneurons, and motor neurons. Now on you have this PowerPoint digitally, so you can always go back to it and look at the bigger pictures yourselves. But when I created the PowerPoints for you here on campus, I just made them smaller just so we could get a bunch in. But, it takes up a lot of pages. But it also makes it easier for you to be able to study purposes and such, right? But you'll see here that these three different types of nerves and their associated structures, which will allow for, and very good communication-wise, right? They will allow for receiving information from the body, thinking about processing what to do with it, and then send out some type of signal to cause a change, to cause some type of reaction. So the sensory neurons, they receive the stimuli. The interneurons, well, the brain and spinal cord will determine what we need to do as far as response is concerned. And then the motor neuron will actually control what goes out as far as sending electricity, bioelectricity, and action potential, we call it, to a muscle, a gland, whatever it may be, and then it'll cause some type of action. So you'll see here with this next image, microphone. All right, can you hear me now, folks? Those that are online, can you hear me? Yes. Yes, okay, so how about now? I can hear you now. All right, very good. So, all right, so I was using the device in our room. I'll just use my computer as far as its audio is concerned for you all. So thank you for giving me the heads up, and thanks, Eric, for letting me know. All right, so let's go back to the PowerPoint here. And yeah, so I was just getting back to talking about so the brain, it's just got these neurons, these nerve cells, and then they're just sending electrical action potentials, graded potentials to each other, right? Graded potentials they're receiving, action potentials they're sending, and they're creating memories. They're allowing for us, so specifically, right, as we look at this brain right here, so really in the anterior, the frontal lobe, where my fingers are covering right now, that area is where allowing you to consciously control the muscles of your body. Damage to that area can affect your ability to actually control the deliberate movement of your body and such. So they're excitable. Now look at down here in blue where it says the resting membrane potential is positive in the outside, ECF, negative on the inside. I'm going to show you what that means. All right, so this line represents the plasma membrane. So look at the cell model right here. So the cell model right here, folks, this is the cell model that I'm showing the class. So that's that. You see the outer part of the cell. This outer part of the cell is the plasma membrane of the cell. Understood? So that's the plasma membrane of the cell. It's the covering. It's what keeps all the contents in the cell together. So there's a difference in the extracellular fluid and the intracellular fluid, meaning outside of the cell and inside of the cell. Okay? Because there are certain chemicals present and ions present, they're just different. There are different structures and chemicals that are present that will allow for a little bit of a positive charge outside of the plasma membrane and a little bit of a negative charge inside. Now it's kind of hard to fathom this, but that's what goes on. Go ahead.
This is inside of a nerve cell.
This is inside, yes. And actually other cells too. So in muscle and other cells also. But in particular, we're talking about the nerve cells, and we're talking about also like muscle cells because they're also able to do this. So look at this positive and negative, having that, we would say polarity. Have you ever played around with magnets at all? Magnets have a polarity, do they not? If you put two with the same poles, they're going to repel each other, if I'm not mistaken, but opposites attract, right? Remember that? So this difference allows for the ability to produce this electricity, okay? So it says here, potential to do work of launching a nerve impulse. So that's that nerve impulse, that's the action potential, that's the gradient potential, okay? Why don't everybody just stand up for a moment, just stretch it out for a little bit there. You know, we're right after lunch and it can get a little rough after lunch and we don't want to fall asleep. But again, know that I'm providing some images for you here, but it's not, I'm not going to, there's a reason like neurology, the study of the nervous system, people who are neurologists, they're incredibly bright. they're the neurosurgeons. They're like the rock stars in the medical field, right? They get paid a whole lot of money because they do things that very few people on earth can do, right? Quite remarkable, right? So when I'm teaching you all neurology, I'm trying to do all that I can to bring it as simple as I can and not stress you guys out with that. Speaking of which, as far as testing is concerned and such, so I reopened up some quizzes for you all, right? So quiz number 1 and 2 were due last week, but those of you that missed it, I reopened it for you all. Okay, I reopened it for those so that they can get it. This week, the tests will be on the chapter 6, which would be the muscular system. Okay, so from this Thursday after 5 o'clock till Sunday night, 11:55, the quiz for the muscular system will be open. Okay, and so you'll have the opportunity to do that. There's 20 questions, and there are 30 minutes to do it. 30 minutes, 20 questions. Okay, and I already graded anybody that's done a quiz so far. I've already graded those. If they weren't already graded, the first quiz had a little short essay, 2 essays. So I took care of those. They're all posted and such. And so we'll go from there. Remember also that the lowest quiz grade gets dropped. Okay. So coming back to our image here in the PowerPoint. So this is just showing you that what's going on as far as the outside of the cell and inside of the cell, and that you see these sodium ions, potassium ions. You might have heard these things. So like bananas, high in potassium. Sodium, things like salt, table salt and such. So these chemicals, these ions are very important. They have a charge, and where they are present within or outside of the cells allows for then these electrical impulses, these nerve impulses in the nervous system to be produced. It's weird. I get it. I totally understand. When you first read it or hear it, and you're like, I don't understand that. Well, this is just, all I can tell you is that this is just how the body works, and that we'll go from there and just accept that. But realize that chemical levels are higher in one area than the other, and that'll also allow for there to be more of a positive or negative charge depending upon the chemical concentration in those areas. So that term nerve impulse, okay, nerve impulse generated when a signal causes the neuron's resting membrane potential to reverse. So what does that mean? So look over here on the board and see how it says this is that positive on the outside, negative on the inside. We would say that that is the condition at rest. No electricity is being produced, okay? So we would call this then the resting membrane potential. Positive on the outside, negative on the inside. That's important to know that that's at rest. That's what's going on. When the body wants to produce that nerve impulse, it's going to reverse that, and it will be negative on the outside and positive on the inside at different stages, at different levels. So we'll have it move from one area to the other area to the other area at a time. It'll reverse. The polarity will reverse, and this will allow for then communication to take place and change to take place at the end. Okay? This was going to allow for us to have the ability to contract our muscles. Weird, strange, I know, but this is what goes on. Go ahead.
When the charges change,
yes,
would that be considered
it's
potential?
Yeah, and so it's a temporary charge. It's a temporary change in that resting membrane potential to do the opposite. And when it does that, that's what's going on as far as that electricity, that bioelectricity. I like to use the term bioelectricity. So those graded potentials, those action potentials, they are bioelectricity, okay? And that's as a result of the reverse in that resting membrane potential. So these action potentials travel away from the starting point. The graded potentials, they go to the neuron cell body, right? The action potential travels down that axon. Remember over here? The axon, we only have one of those, and that travels away, and it goes to a muscle or a gland. Okay, so very important that that's where it's moving to. So there are mechanisms that will allow for this movement of these ions, right? These sodium and potassium ions in particular. There's mechanisms to move them from one area outside of the cell to inside of the cell, or the opposite, okay? And in case of this sodium potassium pump, it's moving against the natural flow. So think about this for a moment. If I have a high sodium ion concentration here and a low sodium ion concentration here, when they move from high to low, that's called diffusion. Do you recall it? Like, so how about this? I have a bottle of cologne and I spray it in the front of the room, right? Now, those in the front of the room will start to smell it, and eventually it'll diffuse, right, out into the back of the room, and you all will be able to smell it in the back. That's diffusion, going from a high concentration in the bottle to low concentration outside within the room, okay? This is in nature, it's natural for there to be movement from high to low. Again, it's called diffusion. But to go against that, to go from low to high, doesn't want to do that. So do you think that there's energy required for it to go from low to high? There is. Remember that term ATP? I said that, mentioned that before. ATP, energy produced, needs by the cells, in particular the mitochondria. So if we're looking at this model right here, so these represent the mitochondria, these structures right here. And so they produce, mitochondria produce the ATP needed, okay, to power these type of reactions, okay, to move from low to high, needs energy. So you'll see here it says the sodium potassium pump actively transports ion across the neuron's membranes. So it's moving it, right, with energy from against their concentration gradients. So when we're looking at this plasma membrane, in the outside we have a high concentration of sodium ions. On the inside we have a high concentration of potassium ions. Sodium and potassium are on both sides of the plasma membrane, outside and in, but they're in greater concentrations, like I show you here. Higher concentration inside for potassium, higher concentration of sodium ions outside. And that contributes to that whole resting membrane potential of positive on the outside, negative on the inside. Okay? This statement right here, neuron cannot fire again until the resting potential is restored, meaning that it's back to positive on the outside, negative on the inside, that resting membrane potential. Where it started off at, where it's resting at, okay? So there's no electricity being produced, it's resting there, that's good. So don't worry about looking at the image and like memorizing it or anything, but just you're seeing here that there's ions on outside and inside, and they move back and forth, and this is what causes those changes that can allow for then the actual electricity to be produced. You're seeing here also, it's just showing you that we have other mechanisms of moving the sodium and potassium ions out, in and out. Go ahead, question.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're not interrupting. It's good.
So it's sodium and potassium, primarily that affects like ionic.
Yes, yeah. So there's other stuff. I just want you to know sodium and potassium, those are the big ones as far as they're moving, and that's what affects and what allows for the nerves to produce electricity.
Sorry, I got it mixed up in my head.
No, you're good. No, you're absolutely good, because there's other ones, but just sodium, potassium, if you get that down, that's a good thing. And so what we're seeing here, folks, is that, and don't worry about memorizing this, don't worry about, but just I wanted to show you that there's a change in this plasma membrane, and when it changes, there are actual levels that we can calculate and that we can measure. So it goes from like a negative 70 millivolts. This is just a term that's negative 70 millivolts. It goes all the way up to a positive, right? More like a positive 30 millivolts, and then it comes back down past the negative 70 to like negative 90 millivolts, and then it goes back to that negative. So know that there's values that we can actually measure. That's all I want you to know. Values that can be measured. That's what that chart's showing. Let's come back over here now. Question? Good? Okay. So action potentials stimulate neurons to release chemicals, these neurotransmitters. So when we looked at the muscular system, that acetylcholine, the ACH, that's a nerve chemical. Dopamine, serotonin, those are also nerve chemicals, neurotransmitters. Now you'll see here where it says in the PowerPoint, molecules diffuse across the chemical synapse, that space between neurons. So there's a space between neurons, and there's also when neurons will touch. So it's kind of varies. And there's also a space between the nerve and the muscle. That's that synapse. That's that area of communication, that space, right, where that communication takes place, where it happens. This is interesting here that it can either excite or inhibit. It can actually cause muscles to do something or not. But case in point, Eric, sit in front of me just for one moment. I won't bother you again. Just one more time. But when I did the whole thing where I stimulated where he ended up having the reflex, the lower leg contracting. Now do this for me. Straighten out your leg. Everybody stand up. Stand up. Straighten out one leg. Straighten your right leg. And tighten the muscles in the quadriceps and the hamstring. Tighten them both. When you do that, do that. Now try and bend it if you're doing that. How can you bend it? You can't do that. No, because both muscle groups, remember, they're antagonistic. If one does one action, the other does the opposite action. Right? Quadriceps, hamstring. Quadriceps, hamstrings, right? They're antagonistic muscles. So, Eric, have a seat again. You guys won't sit. So, when I stimulated that reflex, the quadriceps contracted. But what about the hamstring? Did they contract? No, they didn't contract, because if not, if everything was contracted, it would just be like this and stay like that. But no, they went extended and then relaxed. And so the body sent stimulation to quadriceps, but it inhibited information from going to the hamstring. So you see that? So there's stimulation and inhibition in the nervous system. Thanks. All right, so there's excitation and inhibition that can occur. And so you'll see here that two other nerve chemicals we're introducing, epinephrine and norepinephrine. But you may know them by different names, right? They're AKA, also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. You've probably heard of adrenaline, I'm sure. You've heard people say, oh, that guy's an adrenaline junkie, or that girl's an adrenaline junkie, right? That's not uncommon. They really want like to be stimulated to like do like crazy stuff and really like be jacked up, so to speak. That's epinephrine, norepinephrine, or adrenaline, noradrenaline. Those are the chemicals that are nerve chemicals, okay? In addition to acetylcholine, in addition to serotonin and dopamine. Here we can see, as far as what this image right here is showing you, that we have action potential flows along, it should say flows along the axon of a motor neuron to the neuromuscular junction, the nerve muscle junction, where an axon terminal forms a synapse. It's just an area of communication with a muscle fiber, right? So you've got the nerve, the muscle. Doesn't touch, there's a space, and the nerve will release a chemical, that neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, and allow for then the muscle to begin the contraction process. So see, that's where that nerve, muscle, they interact, those chemicals are released, and contraction will occur. And we said to you that, remember that, if I said to you that, so botulinum toxin, so botulism, that will prevent that chemical from going into the space. And what's going to happen? No muscle contraction, right? No muscle contraction. So it's called flaccid paralysis, right? So meaning that it's not just, so there's a type of paralysis where you have tight muscles, right? Tight muscles, okay? That's opposite from the type of paralysis where we have this flaccid paralysis as a result of affecting the chemicals at that neuromuscular junction. And so the muscles will be kind of floppy. And over time, they'll actually, they won't be able to contract or very minimally contract, be very, very weak. And over time, they'll get smaller, they'll atrophy, okay? That's this flaccid paralysis from the botulism. So here, look at this here. This is very interesting, and then we'll take our break, okay? So these nerve chemicals, also known as neurotransmitters, okay? So the acetylcholine, ACH, I've drawn it like that a lot, right? So it's just a matter of it allows for muscle contraction to take place, as well as it can affect mood and memory within the nervous system, right? Epinephrine, norepinephrine. So think about epinephrine and norepinephrine as if my body was controlled by a gas pedal. And if I press the pedal all the way to the floor, you know, going really fast, right? This is what happens with the processes of the body when that's released short term, right? It jacks you up, right? I'm like, you're like hyper, you're like sweating, you're like, it's, you know, everything is accelerated. Speeds heart rate, dilates the pupils so that you have more light coming in, you can see more, better. Airways to the lungs, increase airflow to the lungs, slowing the GI tract contractions, because really, do you want to be digesting food while you're like going to either fight or run? Right, because it's called fight or flight, right? You've heard that before, maybe? Fight or flight. It prepares the body for action. It's just, you know, either you're going to run or you're going to fight. And it increases anxiety. So, interesting, right? So this is something, unfortunately, if you go for a job interview, you're going to have a test. Your sympathetic nervous system will release these chemicals and you will get all like jacked up. You'll start sweating, you'll get anxious, you won't feel right. You might get a little butterflies in the stomach, so to speak, right? A little nausea, dry mouth. These are all responses that can take place as a result of the sympathetic nervous system and that epinephrine norepinephrine. Dopamine reduces excitatory effects of other neurotransmitters, plays a role in memory, learning, biomotor coordination. Also, as far as for positive sensations that your brain will experience and you will experience, dopamine. Serotonin elevates your mood. It's a big deal, folks. So like people with depression and such can have different issues with their serotonin levels, okay? Role in memory and learning. And then GABA, G-A-B-A, inhibits the release of other neurotransmitters. So if we have stimulatory, we also have to have inhibitory. Go ahead.
I used to work at a health food store. Gaba was sold a lot for anxiety, people with anxiety. What exactly is it inhibiting?
So the mode and how it does it, I'm sorry, I don't know the action. I don't recall it at all, but you're right. Yeah, so you can actually get certain medications and certain, artificially made substances that can actually be taken that can help you with different neurological disorders, nervous system disorders, and anxiety is a big one. Yeah. So trying to do things, St. John's wort also, so like herbs and such also, big deal as far as people trying to go a natural way. Just like white potatoes, taking a white potato every day, right? Like a baked potato, they say that also increases serotonin levels. So, there's different things to do. But sometimes people have issues where they were born that, like genetically, they're predisposed to depression and such. If you can be predisposed to issues with the cardiovascular system, breast cancer, prostate cancer, other types of cancers, can you also not be predisposed to issues with the nervous system not functioning right and have issues with the brain chemicals and such? Most definitely. All right, folks, we're going to take a break. So those of you that are online, we're going to take a 15-minute break. I'm going to, I'll leave the camera on because it's only for my camera, but I'll turn off the mic and I'll come back in about 3:15 and we'll start class. All right, folks, I'll see you in a little bit. Okay, those of you that are online, we're going to begin with the next slide. Okay, so you see here that on this slide talks about neurotransmitters. We see that on the bottom, okay? And here's what I want you to remember about these neurotransmitters is that, yes, they're released into that synaptic space, that area. Remember, right, from the nerve to the muscle, they're released and they cause something to take place. In particular, they can cause muscle contraction to occur. How about if they're just continually being released and they're not being taken away from that area? That's not a good situation, right? That would be a problem, okay? Just tried to reboot that to see if I could get that to work. All right, so neurotransmitter chemicals must be removed from the synapse. So there are actually chemicals that are present that can actually help them to be released from that space so that they're not just continually being released and continually causing some type of stimulatory action. Now look at this where it says here neuromodulators. Amplify, increase, or dampen, decrease the effects of a neurochemical, a neurotransmitter. So look at this here. I would bet that quite a few of you may have heard the term endorphin. Have you ever heard endorphins? It's your body's natural analgesic, right? So like, how can someone do some crazy things after they've been shot many, many times? This has happened in war times and such, and people can still keep on going on and doing what they need to do. Or someone, even in terms of like doing a marathon, and they're running for long distances in there, and they actually get like a high, like a little bit of a buzz from a natural high, they call it, from these endorphins being released, right? That can help to inhibit, interestingly enough, substance P. So write this down next to substance P. Substance P, this is for pain. So we're helping to really dampen the effects of pain. So it's the body's natural analgesic. I'll write that term on the board. Let's erase something on the board. So endorphins are the body's natural analgesic, meaning pain reliever. So that's what endorphins are. There's also another chemical, enkephalons, but just know the endorphins. You've heard that, I'm sure, before, like I said, and so know that, please. So I demonstrated the patellar reflex here in class, right? Those of you online, I'm sorry, I couldn't, our camera for in classroom here is not functioning right at the moment. So I did show those in classroom here, how the patellar reflex was elicited by me just using like the knife edge of my hand, right, to hit, to stimulate the ligament from the patella to the lower leg, which would be the tibia, the tibial tuberosity. It anchors there. So I was able to stimulate that. As such, there were receptors that were receiving information, sending it to the spinal cord. In turn, from the spinal cord, it was going directly to the muscles of the quadriceps to allow for the lower leg to extend, right? That's the quadriceps are stimulated in order for that lower leg extension, okay? So you'll see here that it's this reflex, simplest nerve pathway, doesn't involve the brain. So if I were to touch something hot, the withdrawal reflex, I touch something hot, whoa, or I touch something that's sharp, oh, ouch, right? You move it very quickly away from whatever it may be. Happens so fast that you can't control that. because it's not your brain thinking, oh, I need to move my hand. No, right away, your brain, your nervous system, and in particular your spinal cord, will allow for this reflex to occur and to protect you. Okay, so very simple, very fast. Here, look at this, the baby's rooting reflex. So we've had babies in our family this past couple of years and such. It's been exciting, right? And a new one on the way. And when you hold a baby, especially a newborn, right, and you touch their cheek, can't hear me. Huh. All right, let's see. Halima, can you hear me now? Is there anybody else? Is there anybody else online that can't hear me? You can hear Sam? Okay, you can hear me fine. Halima, you might be having issues with your internet. And you can just, and I would just say maybe if you can't hear me, then you can just watch what's going on and listen to the lecture afterwards when I post it later on tonight or tomorrow for the class, since I'm recording it. I'm sorry. Yeah, because Sam can hear. Anybody else? Michael, can you have any issues hearing? Okay. All right, well, I'm going to keep on going on. I'm sorry, so you'll have to get that checked out there. Again, she can't hear me saying that, but I'll send her a message. All right, let me send her a quick message. Okay, so getting back to the reflexes and such. So the rooting reflex, that's what I wanted to show you. So if you were to hold the baby and touch the cheek, what will the baby do? It moves to the stimulation. That's the rooting reflex, right? And also that if you put, yeah, so if you touch the other side, they'll go to that side and such. And there's like a startle reflex I mean, there's a couple of different, these very basic primitive type reflexes that will take place for infants because their nervous system is immature and it's still growing and still maturing. Again, a reflex. Here you're just seeing here, and I just want to show you that just like the nervous system, just like the muscular system had bundles of different structures that make up skeletal muscle. Well, in the nervous system, we have these bundles also covered in connective tissue, and they are also bundles, and you'll see here on the bottom, that's called myelin. Myelin is an insulator. So a demyelinating disorder like multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis damages the myelin. Multiple sclerosis damages the myelin, okay? And that's the covering. So that protective insulating sheath, like you see the wires up there, folks, look at the wires, right? They're covered, they're insulated. That's the same thing like myelin. It's a fatty tissue that insulates the axons and allows for very fast communication to take place. So I believe I said to you, I might have said this before, not in your class, in another class, but so these action potentials, these electricity that travels to the skeletal muscle, 100 meters per second, meaning in 1 second's time, 300 feet per second that electricity can travel. 300 feet per second, because it's 3 feet per yard, right? Yeah, so there you go, meter, 3 feet. So it's very fast, extremely fast. And so that's with the myelin, that's with this insulation, that covering, okay? And so I said to you that there are these disorders like multiple sclerosis that'll damage that sheath, that insulating barrier covering. Here you're just seeing as far as what takes place as far as when there is some type of load placed upon muscles. In order for them not to be damaged, we have these stretch reflexes and these receptors that will be able to tell, hey, you've got a heavy weight or a light weight, and how should the muscles respond? Remember I said to you in skeletal muscle contraction that not all of the muscle fibers, not all the muscle cells contract, right? In other words, I'm lifting this up, it's not too heavy, right? But how about this? It's a little bit heavier. So I'm using more muscle fibers for this one than I am for this item, okay? So depending upon the load, whether it's light or heavy, depends upon how many muscle fibers are being stimulated to contract. And so here you're just seeing that fruit being loaded into a bowl puts weight on the arm muscles. They'll stretch. There'll be a little bit of a stretch. Will the bowl drop? No, because the muscle spindles, these are specific types of receptors in the muscle that as they're stretched, they're going to send information to the spinal cord, and right away it's going to then tell the muscles, there's this reflex arc that tells the muscles that are being stretched, hey, stimulate more muscle fibers to contract in order to take the load instead of just having it fall to the ground. Okay, so this is also called a stretch reflex. So what I did with Eric with his lower leg extending, that's also a stretch reflex. All right, now getting into as far as the structures present within the nervous system. I'm going to sit for a minute or two if you don't mind. So as we look at the nervous system, it's comprised of two different areas. Now, these areas will be broken down further as far as the peripheral nervous system is concerned. But when you think of the nervous system, there are the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. It says there for the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. So that's just the central nervous system. Folks, if that gets damaged, there's no healing going on. Scar tissue formation, but if you damage the nervous system, the central nervous system, it doesn't heal by replacing it with nervous system tissue. If it did, we can have folks that were in a car accident, severed their spinal cord, and it would heal and they'd be okay. And they wouldn't lose the loss of their upper extremities or lower extremities. But no, unfortunately, that's not the case. And so central nervous system that gets damaged doesn't get replaced with nerve tissue. The peripheral nervous system, how many of you have cut your hand? You cut your hand, it might feel a little weird for a while, but then you get the sensation back in the fingers, right? That's because those nerves, they heal over time. Slowly, but they heal. This term, afferent and efferent. So you see this image of the multipolar neuron. And you see how the dendrites, they're taking information to the body, right? We say that that's an afferent type of movement, A-F-F-E-R-E-N-T. It's going to the neuron cell body. The information, the action potentials, the electricity traveling down the axon, we would say that that's efferent, E-F-F-E-R-E-N-T. It's just terms we use within the medical field, okay? And so that's just how we describe whether information is going to something or exiting away from something. So efferent or afferent. And I have an image here So you see this image here, which is showing you, this is the spinal cord right here. Spinal cord is this right here. So information is going to, from the skin, from the receptors to the spinal cord, or going from the spinal cord to the muscle. So this is, so say you touch something hot or you touch something sharp. Right? You very quickly, you're moving it away because of this reflex action and the mechanism of AFF, ERANT, afferent information going to, efferent information, EFF, ERANT, going away from, exiting from the spinal cord and going to the muscle, okay, causing change to occur. You also see here this peripheral nervous system. So anything that's connected to the nervous system, anything that's the nervous system that's not the brain or the spinal cord is the peripheral nervous system, okay? So any part of the nervous system that's not the brain or the spinal cord would be the peripheral nervous system. So nerves and receptors in your hands, your lower extremities, your upper extremities, your legs, your arms, your hands, right? Your face, right? So we're looking at as far as peripheral nerves. Now, there are also special types of nerves called cranial nerves. So spinal nerves come off of your spine, your spinal cord. Cranial nerves come directly off of the brain, but they're not the brain. They're nerves coming off of the brain, so they're still considered peripheral nerves. So you should know that there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves and there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves, okay? So your ability for your sense of smell, that's one of the olfactory nerve. That's a cranial nerve, and that's cranial nerve number 1. So your special senses, your ability to see, vision, right? Your ability to move your eye muscles, those are all cranial nerves, okay? So very important that those nerves, again, they're on both sides, and they really do help with the functions of the body. And this is just showing you, recall that I said to you before, I said to you that, you know, it speeds up the body, right? That sympathetic reaction. Well, when you look at the peripheral nervous system, it's a branch from this autonomic nervous system, and you see sympathetic, parasympathetic. So sympathetic, all the type of actions where you're speeding up, you have to do something, you have to fight or flight, right? You're in a stressful situation. The sympathetic nervous system is being stimulated. The parasympathetic nervous system is when you're kind of calm, you relax, you're not doing anything. Digestive processes can occur, right? That's throughout most of the day. Unless you're like an adrenaline junkie or you're someone who works in a very high stressful place like an emergency room, right? Or people just like to be always stimulated. So they're always like, you ever heard the term jacked? They're just like jacked. They're just like, what's next? What do we got to do? You know, they're only, now, hyperthyroidism. Someone who has their thyroid glands are kicking out too much thyroid hormone. It's an excessive amount. This person, they can have bulging eyes, right? They're sweaty. They're just, it's like the gas pedals to the floor, right? That's someone who is hyperthyroid, someone whose sympathetic nervous system has been jacked. It's just stimulated. It's not healthy. The body's not meant to. Short periods of time, the body can handle sympathetic stimulation. Long periods, it's not healthy. It's not good. Blood pressure is up, right? And it just really causes major issues. With how the body functions. Here you're just seeing those nerves coming directly off of the spine, spinal nerves, directly off of the brain, cranial nerves. Okay? So the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, everything else, the peripheral nervous system. Here are some terms. So somatic and autonomic. So somatic neurons or nerves are those that stimulate your skeletal muscle. Okay, so your muscles that you can control, your voluntary muscle control, somatic nerves. Autonomic, think about this, think automatic. So autonomic, think automatic, all right? So somatic carry signals to the movements of the head, trunk, limbs. It's voluntary. The autonomic, or we could say the automatic part of your nervous system, there's no conscious control. It's going to the organs of the body and other structures that you don't have control over, okay? Now, some important areas of the central nervous system. So you'll see here the hindbrain, the midbrain, the forebrain. So when you think of, when you see the brain, and you're looking at the cerebrum, these cerebral hemispheres, the largest portion of the brain, that's processing information, right? So it's receiving information, it's sending out information. So whether it's sensory input, like you're actually receiving like you're something that's touch, or it's painful like a stab or a burn, right? Any kind of sensory input goes to an area of the brain, actually in the parietal lobe, which would be more this area, whereas the frontal lobe contains more information for voluntary movement and such, as well as it's who you are. So your ability to be who you are, to have cognitive ability, to think, right? To have all these thoughts and to have your personality, frontal lobe. Go ahead.
This may be an off question, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Why do headaches happen?
Yeah, so there can be issues with what's going on as far as the blood vessels, so blood flow to the brain. There can be multiple issues. Yeah, so like even like medications or certain allergies. Yes, go ahead.
To maybe help answer the question, it could be the body's attempt to, I guess it would be like a sensory effect of like there's something wrong, so it activates like pain receptors in your brain to help you figure that out. Like if you're particularly sick with a head cold or something, you're trying to alert you to this, you know, like an automatic process.
Yeah, so I would tell you that pain is a very good way that the body can reach out to us. So someone who has brain cancer and such can have headaches, very bad headaches, right? Yeah, so, but there can be other processes going on. So it can be as a result of, like I said, blood vessel dilation, constriction, you know, changes in diameter of the blood flow to the brain. It can also be issues with impingement of nerves in the cervical spine. So that's, as a chiropractor, that's what I dealt with, making adjustments to the spine and taking pressure off the nerve flow and allowing for then that to be functioning better. But yeah, so there are multiple etiologies, causes, yeah. The hindbrain you're seeing here, as far as this would be, think of the brain stem. So as we're looking at this sagittal view of the brain, right? This side view of the brain. So in this region would be the brain stem, okay? And in particular, right above where the spinal cord would be located would be the medulla oblongata. And so your breathing rhythm, your heartbeat strength, so your heart rate, your pulse, your blood pressure, your ability to breathe, like it says here, your breathing rhythm and such, controlled by the medulla oblongata. So here's something interesting. So cough medicine. Cough medicine does not work on your throat to stop you from coughing. It can be kind of a thick consistency, and that can kind of coat your throat for a period of time. But the reflex for you to cough is located here in the medulla oblongata. So if you abuse cough medicine or take too much of it, what can you affect as far as your ability to do what? Your ability to breathe. your ability to pee. Well, you could die from taking too much cough medicine. It can really sedate you and stop you from breathing. Crazy stuff, right? But people do it. People abuse it. They'll mix it with alcohol and such, or they'll take it with other drugs and such, and not a wise thing, to be honest, right? So it's interesting how you can take an over-the-counter medication and you wouldn't think anything of, oh, well, big deal. I bought it at the drugstore and I didn't even have to get a prescription for it. Doesn't mean it can be very dangerous to you if you abuse it, right? So, and even just like Sudafed, they'll use Sudafed and they'll make methamphetamine, right? So crazy stuff, but yes.
Is that practically what Advil and Tylenol are doing too? Are they just blocking pain receptors?
They are doing that. Their full mechanism is a little bit more complex than that, but yeah. So and even like, have you ever heard of a TENS unit? Those little boxes that have electricity. So they're also trying to block the movement of and stimulate the nervous system in such a way that you're thinking about that and you're not thinking about the nerves that are being stimulated to actually cause you pain and discomfort. Yeah. Also, you see here the cerebellum, voluntary movements. So folks, if you're drunk, right? Do you have like, you're kind of like moving a little wobbly and such, right? And can't walk a straight line, so to speak, right? Well, what you've done is you've temporarily damaged the cerebellum, right? You've caused issues because the cerebellum gives you that balance and equilibrium in addition to your inner ear. And by doing that, by drugs, by alcohol, it can affect the cerebellum and it can affect your ability. How about if somebody has a brain tumor or a stroke and it affects that area? Can it affect their ability to be stable on their feet? Absolutely. They can have what's called an ataxia, where they're kind of wobbly and not really stable in their ability to move and walk. This is interesting. So your meninges are coverings of the brain. So we have these connective tissue coverings, very important to protect the brain. And actually, there are multiple levels of coverings. There are 3 levels. And the fluid, this cerebrospinal fluid, is in one level of this covering, allowing for protection of the nervous system and such. If you have an issue where this cerebrospinal fluid is leaking as a result of them doing a spinal tap to see if there's some type of like meningitis, right? Meningitis affecting the meninges, the coverings, right? This can be a very bad infection, viral, bacterial. It can actually kill you, right? It can be very severe. And so they'll check your cerebrospinal fluid for virus, bacteria, and then be able to treat accordingly. But if there's a leak in this spinal fluid, it'll give you one of the worst headaches ever, right? Because this spinal fluid really is important for floating the nervous system, floating the brain, allowing it to be protected and covered in this cerebrospinal fluid. Also here it says the blood-brain barrier helps to control which substances within the blood can actually enter into the brain or not. And that's a good thing because this also helps the brain from getting infections. Now I said to you that meningitis and such, that can happen, but really the infections within the nervous system not as frequent, and that's a good thing. Now, can Lyme disease cause interruption and affect the nervous system? Unfortunately, yes. Yeah. So water and lipid soluble substances cross the barrier freely. Okay, so lipid fats, right? They can cross, and water, because water is a necessary solvent in the body. So here you're seeing the fluid is represented by the blue, and there are spaces within the brain. They're called ventricles. These spaces, they're called ventricles. They have and they hold on to this fluid, and they actually have structures that will produce this fluid. So it's really important that it's being made, okay? And you'll see here, as far as this lateral view is concerned, so here would be the cerebellum. This would be the cerebral hemisphere. Here we would have the medulla oblongata and the spinal cord. So spinal cord, medulla oblongata, sorry, I'm looking at, so medulla oblongata, spinal cord, the pons, this is more like the midbrain, this is more of the central area of the brain. So very deep area of the brain, controlling the major functions of your body. The cerebral cortex is an area of the brain that's the wrinkly part of your brain. So as you're looking at this model here and seeing the cerebellum, you have these wrinkles. They're called, one is called a gyrus, and these indentations, one is called a sulcus. I'll write that down. A gyrus is a fold, and a sulcus is an indentation. So the cerebral cortex has these, right? These folds, these indentations. And so it actually allows for an increase in the surface area of the brain. And very important controls as far as motor controls, I said to you before, the ability to control voluntary movement, and sensory for actually receiving information to the brain. And then association areas are areas where they're associated with special senses and such, and special functions. So conscious thought, your capacity for language, very important as far as the cortex and areas of the cortex are concerned. Now, this area here is called the limbic system. So just know that that part of the nervous system, it's comprised of multiple areas of the nervous system. We would say it's your emotional brain, your emotional brain. So how you actually respond to situations with an emotional context and your memories are associated with the limbic system. And think about this for a moment. Your sense of smell is also associated with this. So have you ever smelled something and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking back when I was in kindergarten, or like or my Auntie May, or whatever it may be. Like you're thinking of something, or you smell an apple pie and it's like, ooh, that's so good. Or you smell something bad like a skunk and you're like, it's not just that you have like, oh, smells bad, or oh, smells good. You're like, oh, yeah, it's good, right? You have emotional context to smells, to memories. That's because of your limbic system. Understood? So it's really important that and it's quite interesting that sense of smell, right? Your memories, all associated with emotions. That's that limbic system. Your emotional brain, the limbic system. Let me see where we're at right now. Okay, let's take another break, like a 10-minute break. 10-minute break, and we'll come back. Okay? I know it's a lot of information, so we'll give you a 10-minute break there. So those of you online, 10-minute break, and we'll come back. Thank you. All right, folks, so we're going to be finishing up the chapter here. Very good. So make sure you get on the, I'm sending around an attendance sheet for class here, those in class. So please make sure that you print your name and get on there. All right, so we have a little bit more to go, and primarily we're going to be talking about pathology, about some diseases and such. But first, we're going to just touch a little bit regarding consciousness, regarding memory and such. So we'll go into that a bit. So consciousness here, there are different levels of consciousness. We get that, right? I had a relative who ended up having a major health issue, and he ended up, they put him in a drug-induced coma. So they used different medicines and such in order to allow for him to stay in a state, right, that was not alert, so that he could heal, really, and prevent brain damage. And thank God he's okay. And he did not suffer brain damage, but it could have. So by placing him in this state of this drug-induced coma, this state of subconsciousness, right? So he's unconscious. He's not being able to respond to what's going on around him. His body was able to heal, and that was a very scary thing for us all. It's really quite strange because when we enter into sleep, right, depending, and some of us more than others can be awakened easier or not so easy as a result, being in, depending upon what level of sleep we're in, because there's also those stages of sleep, right? And we need to get enough sleep, folks. I'm going to encourage you all that you probably all don't get enough sleep, right? And it's tough and it's hard. And some of it may be as a result of your life and your work and school and whatever, and stress, right? That can be a part of it. Some of you have other issues that can be affecting your sleep. And some of you just don't choose to get enough sleep. So there's choices sometimes that are involved in that. And then sometimes there's not so much choices, but it's just having issues, clinical issues with difficulty in getting to sleep. And it's tough, folks. I understand that. It's not an easy thing to deal with. I would encourage you, if you're having issues that you don't seem to be able to get a good night's sleep, you should absolutely speak with your family physician, your family doctor, and then if you need to go have a sleep study done and have different issues with a doctor who their specialty is working with patients with sleep, you need that, because there have been studies that have shown that not getting enough sleep, absolutely, it's as if you are under some type of influence of something. So in other words, like drinking alcohol, drugs, whether they're prescription or non. Thank you. You can be under the influence. You can act like you're under the influence because your reflexes are not as good. How many of you wake up, right? And you've had a long, you didn't get enough sleep, and you wake up and it's almost like you got a headache, and you're just not clear in your thinking, right? This is because when you sleep, the cerebral spinal fluid is allowed to pass through and remove the chemicals of waste that have been produced during your alertness. When you're awake, your body is, the brain is very highly metabolic. There's a lot of activity, there's a lot of reactions and processes that take place. And if we don't remove the waste products, then it can kind of affect how we think and how the brain functions. And we know this because we've all experienced it to some level, right? And if you experience it over many days or weeks, it can have a devastating effect. Have you ever not got enough sleep and you've kind of been a little bit snippy, like, hey, what do you want? Like you just kind of, you get a little like curt with people. You're a little bit more on edge. Yeah, it's not a healthy thing. It's not a good thing. So getting proper sleep is a big deal for sure. So like I said, I do encourage you all. You should be getting a minimum of 6 hours, 8 hours is really optimal, 8 to 9 hours. And I know that's like, what? You hear that, you're like, that's not happening, right? Some of you, because of your lives, I get that. I understand that. Or just some of you temporarily, because of what's going on in your life with work and with school and this and that, it's not easy. And if you have a relationship and you want to see that significant other while you're not working and while you're not doing schoolwork, you know, it's hard. I remember that. Anybody work the night shift? You do, but a regular basis or swing shift?
Sort of. It's like afternoon into 10 to 11.
Okay, what I mean is like more like the 11 to 7 or the 12 to 8. Okay, yeah. So I did that in grad school for a little bit, and I did that in other times in my life, and I have to tell you, yeah. And that's the best way to put it, because you crave sleep like a drug addict craves drugs, or an alcoholic craves alcohol. And not to make fun of that, believe me, right? My grandfather was an alcoholic many years, bad stuff. But truly, like, you crave sleep so bad, it's amazing. Because if you don't get enough sleep, oh my gosh, it's terrible. So really, again, I'll get off of that, but sleep is really important. You'll see here different levels of sleep, and this REM sleep is a very important sleep to actually achieve. Some of us can remember our dreams like they're watching TV, and some of us, it's like, I don't know if I dreamt. You did. More than likely you dreamt. And know this also, that the activity that's going in your brain, just because you're unconscious, you know, you're on a lower level of consciousness, brain is still doing things. So that's why I say to you, if you can study at the end of the night for a half hour prior to bed, your brain is still processing that information, and you can actually retain that information. It's pretty cool stuff. And you do this on a regular basis, it's not a bad thing. But really, that REM sleep is a very important one, and it's more difficult to wake from that deeper REM type sleep. Interesting. And the dreams and such also, right? It can vary, because like sometimes you wake up, and so say like you wake up and you're in a dream and you wake up from it, then you usually remember it. But if you've been like sleeping and you're waking up just naturally, a lot of times you're not remembering your dreams so much. But everybody's different. Coming to my wife's forgetting that I'm in class right now. Memory. So short-term and long-term, very interesting. Memory is something that it's fascinating. And I don't remember what it was that was fascinating. No, I'm only kidding. So memory is just quite remarkable in how the body and the brain does what it does in order to process information, right? So declarative type information, declarative memory, skill memory. So skill or procedural memory, like we shoot a basketball, we ride a bike, we do different things that we just do on a regular basis. Skills, more of the, see this part of the brain right here, the cerebellum, that part where remember I said to you that ability to have the stability, right? So you're not like doing like this and that, but you're just walking a straight line, no problem. Cerebellum, procedural memory. Declarative memory, we're talking about memories like you're trying to remember facts, trying to remember, oh, we went to the park on Sunday, these kind of things. So and understanding that transferring memory from short-term to long-term, there's a structure called the hippocampus that enables and helps, and that limbic system also works in conjunction with to help you to convert memories and such, and have long-term memories. I would tell you this, that for when I teach anatomy and physiology, that higher level class of this class here, so I go through with the students every semester that I teach it, all the muscles. So all these muscles on here, I can name them for you, right? And I do that every semester, right? But it's something that I have to also renew. So I know like 80% of them, but I still have to review, or maybe 90%. And I still have to review about 10%. Oh yeah, I know that. And then you remind yourself, right? So, right, you understand that there are some things that you have you ever had a phone number that you're like, you forget the last number or the last couple of numbers, right? But you've known that number for a while, or you just, just things happen and you get a little glitch in the memory, so to speak. But really, long-term memory, repetition is key. Amnesia, it's just a matter of that you've lost that memory. You've lost aspects of your memory. So, so it can be that, either you're losing more of the short term or the long term. It's kind of weird. So with patients who have different types of dementia, they can remember long-term memories, but the area for the newer memories and the short-term memory, not so much, right? So they have issues with that. So depending upon those issues that you have, depending upon that types of degenerative problems that occur with, so like I said, like the dementias and such, Alzheimer's can be one of them, can affect those memories for sure. Look at this here. So you see sensory stimuli as from the special senses, your nose, eyes, and ears, and we're going to look at special senses next class, okay? Next week, next Tuesday. So temporary storage is in the cerebral cortex, those wrinkles, right, the folds. We create a short-term memory. Now, the emotional state, having time to repeat or rehearse input and associate the input with stored categories of memory, influence the transfer to that long-term memory. So whether we create a long-term memory or if it's just the short-term memory and it kind of goes away. So it either goes here or recall the stored input can go back. And so there are ways, like we've talked about, as far as, repetition and connecting a memory to other memories that we already have can be helpful, okay? And so like when I do a review and I point out all the structures for the students, right? Just even by doing that fact of just doing the repetition of that review, that helps to reinforce those long-term memories and restore them. So as far as different types of disorders and diseases, different processes that can occur that go wrong in the nervous system. So how about experiencing a concussion where it's a damage to the brain that can be considered mild, right? But there are levels of concussion also. But really, as far as like damage is concerned, it can be considered mild, but it's also cumulative damage, right? So people that are involved in sports that end up can experience mild concussions. Those concussions over time, that damage over time can build up, and they can really have more serious damage issues to the nervous system, in particular to the central nervous system. Paralysis, we've mentioned before. Epilepsy, this is a case where, so we know that the electricity that the body produces causes contraction of the muscles. Well, how about within the brain, if there is a lot of electrical activity in maybe one area at a time, causing like many neurons to like fire all at once and then stop, and fire all at once, and so you'll have like the types of contracture type of epileptic fits and such, and seizures and such, and so. And there are other disorders also associated with not just epilepsy, but other types of seizure types of disorders that can be devastating. And there are types of seizure disorders that they will actually, as we're looking at, we see here full brain, okay, smaller but full. And they would actually, this seizure disorder that's called Rasmussen Syndrome, and I believe it's more right brain associated, that they'll actually remove the right cerebral hemisphere. They'll remove the right cerebral hemisphere, the whole hemisphere. And so you'll still have the brainstem cerebellum, but they'll remove this whole big portion right here, not the inner workings, but that whole folded area, to help the patient so that they have stoppage of these seizures that can be devastating and that be happening hundreds of times in one day. Think about that. It's terrible. So, and this is for younger people that they'll do this to, because their body and their nervous system have this ability to rebound. And so when we have this part of the brain is missing, this part of the brain will take over. I didn't mention to you that as we're looking at the brain here, this right side of the brain, the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. Left brain controls right side of the body, okay? So what happens when I have this right side of the brain removed? Yikes, right? Well, over time, and the patient is young enough, this side of the brain will take over for those functions. Fascinating, amazing stuff. Parkinson's disease, this is damaging certain inner parts of the brain that release chemicals and control how inhibition and allowing for different types of muscle tone to occur. So in the case of, so dopamine is a part of one of those chemicals that's important for this, and really they're lacking dopamine. And so what'll happen is that, have you ever seen someone who their face, they have like no facial expression, they're just kind of like, I don't mean to make fun, I'm just like this blank affect, and they'll kind of walk like they'll kind of like shuffle, and they'll like turn, and then they'll move. And they'll shake. Have you ever seen people shake? Now, not all shaking disorders, not all of these type of tremor disorders are associated with Parkinson's, but Parkinson's is one disorder that does have this tremors attached to it. There can be tremors that are benign, that we don't really know why that the patient has the tremor, but they do, and but it's not as a result of an illness or a disease. Okay. I've already mentioned Alzheimer's and how and knowing that it's a dementia, so it's affecting the cognitive ability for this patient, but it's progressive, sadly, and you all kind of figured that out already. You've heard of that before, and sad. It's devastating, to be honest, because really, the person that you knew prior to the illness is slowly dying, and you're missing out on that person, and it's devastating. It's absolutely devastating. So all types of dementia, just extremely sad. Meningitis encephalitis, brain inflammation, meaning that there's an infection going on, whether it's bacterial or viral, there's some type of infection going on. Glial cells, glial cancer. So these are, so I told you about the neurons, the nerve cells. Well, you understand that there's also support cells. There are cells that support the nerve cells and help them, protect them, provide nutrition, and do other functions. And that myelin, recall I mentioned about that myelin, that remember the insulating sheath? That myelin is produced by and composed of these support cells. And so there can be cancers from them also. And those cancers can be pretty devastating. Multiple sclerosis, I talked to you about that earlier today. I said it's a demyelinating disorder, meaning that, see that insulation? Imagine you remove the insulation, yet there's still electricity passing through. What happens then? That electricity passing through there, it's not as good. It's not going to be as fast, and it's not going to get to the end, all of it, the electricity. So what can happen is that folks that have multiple sclerosis can have issues with their vision, special senses, with their ability to walk. They can have paresthesias where they don't have as much feeling sensation, or they can have numbness and tingling in their limbs. Yeah, there's a lot of, and it can actually lead to death over an extended period of time. Autoimmune, meaning that the body is attacking itself. Yeah, it's terrible, absolutely terrible. Guillain-Barre, this is a type of multiple sclerosis in the peripheral nervous system. So I said to you that the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, that's multiple sclerosis. Guillain-Barre, this can be temporary, which is really weird. I had a patient who was diagnosed with Guillain-Barre, and I didn't know it because we were treating him like we normally would treat patients, and and it's hard to discover. But he ended up, he was actually not responding to treatment like he should have, like normally the body would respond. And he ended up having to go to the hospital because his extremities were starting to shut down so that they were, he lost the ability to walk. Pretty scary. And they could even end up going on a ventilator to help them to breathe, patients with Guillain-Barre. But then over time, they can rebound from this, right? Because peripheral nervous system can recover. Central nervous system damage it, that's it, right? So quite interesting, but not interesting if it's you, right? So, you know, as far as especially the multiple sclerosis. My oldest cousin has been suffering it for like 30 some odd years. And it's a progressive degenerative type of disorder. Headaches. So there are different types of headaches. You'll see here as far as, and like I mentioned to you, as far as a chiropractor, treating headaches, so like from misalignment in the cervical spine, tightness in the musculature, that can contribute to headaches. But there are other types of vascular type headaches also that can be, and so there are many different types of headaches. And so for a neurologist or your family doctor to be able to determine and diagnose which type, that's can be a challenge. Yeah. And it can be a challenge to treat. So neural disorders affecting mood and such, right? So this can also be associated with chemical imbalances, but that's not fully the whole thing regarding these issues, because they give the patients medications that can affect those chemical levels, and yet sometimes they still don't. So it's more than just you're missing a chemical, we give you the chemical, and now you're good, right? Because if that were the case, we would have no more mental illness. But here's the thing, like, so when I first went into practice, I was practicing in Norristown, starts with an N, Norristown, Pennsylvania. And in Norristown, my uncle and my cousin had a couple of practices, and I ran one of the practices. And in Norristown, there's a state hospital for mental illness and such, and for intellectual issues and such, mental, different types of severity of illnesses, mental illnesses. Go ahead. There you go. Yes. And it was a challenge because there was a good portion of my practice that I took care of patients who were also mental health patients, and would, you know, go, and it was just sad. And it's a tough population because a lot of times that anything that can help them maybe a bit, like medications and such, they won't take on a regular basis. They won't follow. They're not compliant with their treatments that they're told. It's sad stuff, man. Mental illness and all associated neural disorders affecting mood. I mean, these can be really some very challenging disorders to treat. So as far as studying the brain, you'll see here that we have these, you probably have heard of these EEGs or PET scan, and so we're able to actually see what's going on with the structures of the nervous system. Functional MRI, also as far as for looking at how the nervous system is functioning, and MRIs for what's going on as far as the spinal cord and brain, as far as any type of tumors or any type of herniations and such, and bulging. This interesting brain bank. So normal and abnormal brains are kept after death for study. And really, so this has been a big deal regarding these contact sports, right? And trying to determine what's going on with these, you know, so how much minor damage as far as concussions, having this cumulative effect, can have a major effect over a lifetime of a person playing professional sports and such. You'll see here also that So mind-altering pharmaceuticals and drugs and such. So psychoactive substances bind to neuron receptors in the brain, and some can affect the pleasure center, and some can affect in such a way that they elicit this addictive behavior. Okay, I'll share with you all. I'll send out a link in an email sometime by Thursday. Watching a YouTube video that I'd like you all to see regarding addictive behavior and what goes on as far as those centers within the brain that deal with pleasure and such, and the neurochemicals, those neurotransmitters. You'll see here that whether it's a stimulant or a depressant, maybe some of you didn't know that alcohol was a depressant, right? But it truly is. And so even for folks that are outside in the cold and they think, oh, alcohol will warm me up. No, that'll lead to, if you're out in the cold for too long, to hypothermia, right? Just, understand that, people that are homeless and that are alcoholics, they can die as a result of drinking in the freezing cold weather, and it's a depressant. Morphine and heroin, again, too, these can block pain signals. Go ahead.
Is it true that if it's broken, go outside and
Makes you feel. Does it intensify your?
Yeah.
I don't know, to be honest. That's a good.
I don't know if it's myths, but
Yeah, I don't know regarding that. I do know that people will do crazy things with alcohol. Right? So they'll do things like get an eye cup and put it to their eye. Yeah, that's really. Do you want to go blind? Issues like doing the alcohol and the cough medicine that affects the brainstem. That's not so great. That's very bad. They'll not to be rude, but they'll soak like different things into alcohol and put them in parts of their body that they shouldn't be putting alcohol. Yeah, I mean, there's just like people will do things to become high that when you think about it, though, that's how sad is it that people are willing to do crazy behavior to forget about things or to numb them to things. So there's a lot of people that are hurting in the world, and that stinks. That's sad. That I find extremely sad. So, but I mean, we can all make a difference in our sphere of people and those that we know, and and make an influence for good, even though there's a lot of bad that goes on in the world. And really, with what goes on as far as, so this last one here, as far as what's going on in our world today, that's still going on as far as this epidemic of people who are addicted to pain meds, right, and heroin, and there are people who have major pain issues that stop getting prescription drugs, and then they will go on heroin just because they can get it on the street because they can no longer get a prescription for it, try and manage their pain, but then it leads to other bad things, and it's just, oh, again, another very sad situation that goes on regarding addiction. And so this is the last slide here talking about, so the nervous system produces signals flowing between the brain and spinal cord and other parts of the body. And again, like I said to you earlier today, it works with that endocrine system to try and maintain stable levels within the body, no matter what goes on outside. So I know it's like heavy. I know this is a hard one. This is not an easy chapter, to be honest, right? Nervous system, it's tough stuff. But I hope you were able to pull a little bit of some interesting things from it, and I hope I was able to try to bring it down to a level that wasn't too intense. So this Thursday, we have then the next lab group coming in, right? So we have A and B. So I think it's A is coming in this week. Am I correct, right? So lab group A is coming in, and so we'll have lab stuff going on. And then at 5 o'clock, from 5 o'clock Thursday evening till Sunday, 11:55, you'll have access to the quiz, just one quiz for the muscular system. Yeah. Again, you have that 3x5 card. One side, you can put information that you can use while you're taking the quiz. All right. Any questions for me at all? All right, gang, be well, take care, be safe. Have a good one.